When the going gets tough, the tough get going. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Rome wasn't built in a day, you know. Tough times call for tough people. Success doesn't come to you, you go to it. From breakdowns come breakthroughs. When you get knocked down, get up again. When life hands you lemons, make lemonade. Friends, sometimes life is hard. Not always, but sometimes. Life is hard. Bad things happen. We lose our jobs. The people we love get sick. The world economy tanks. The East Coast has an earthquake and a hurricane in the same week. Sometimes life is hard. That's part of the freedom that God gives us to live in this world. Sometimes we will face tough moments. And although we've developed cute little proverbs to try and remind ourselves that it's possible to get through them, we know in our hearts that even when life hands us lemons and we do our best to squeeze the juice out of them, the lemonade can still be bitter. But for as hard to swallow as some of those proverbs can be, they do point to an undeniable truth. In the end, there's no way to get through hard times except to get through them. Granted, some ways might be healthier than others. But there's no magic formula, no perfect path for facing the challenges of life. In the end, we just have to do it. The good news that we don't have to do it alone. Friends, the good news is that we don't have to squeeze the lemons all by ourselves. That would be a bitter affair. No! Fortunately for us, we have sweeteners all around us. From the presence of God to the support of our communities of faith to the collected wisdom of all of those who have faced hard times before us. And in case you're wondering who they are, it is so today, after a somewhat bitter week, a week which began with the remembrance of a national tragedy, and then went on each day to provide us with another depressing statistic about the world economy, it seems fitting that we pause for just a moment to remind ourselves of that sweet truth of our faith, which is that no matter how troubling the circumstance seems, life wins in the end. Friends, we are a people who believe in life. We are a faith that is about life. And today, we are reminded of that hope, that sweet hope of life, with the help of our good friend, Joseph. Not of Mary and Joseph fame, but of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame. Many of you will remember that this past summer, we spent several weeks following the story of the highly dysfunctional family of Abraham. From Abraham to Isaac to Jacob and Esau, and now down through Joseph, who, when we left him, had been falsely accused of lying down with his slave master's wife, a juicy tale you may remember, and had been thrown into jail. In other words, at this point in the story, things are not going particularly well for Joseph, and frankly, it would be understandable if he were a little down. After all, he has had a pretty rough go of it. His brothers sold him into slavery after stealing his favorite robe. He was sold again to be Pharaoh's captain of the guard, where it looked for a moment like things were going to be okay, like he was on the up and up, until again his garment was stolen, and false accusations were made, and he was thrown into jail, where we find him today. This would be enough to ruin anyone's year. But for some reason, Joseph seems okay. Perhaps he was too naive to to recognize just how troubling his situation was. Or maybe he had some unspoken faith that assured him that things were going to be all right. Who knows? What we do know is that each time he lands in a challenging situation, he somehow manages to find a way to make the best of it. When he was a slave in the captain's house, he became so successful that he was put in charge of his master's affairs. Today, just before our passage begins, we learn that when he was thrown into jail, instead of wallowing in anguish, he befriended the chief jailer and was put in charge of all the other prisoners. This guy is good. We don't know exactly what it is, but he has it. Instead of sitting paralyzed in terrible situations in which he finds himself, he somehow manages to make the best of them. And frankly, it's kind of annoying. If we're honest, we would be much more comfortable if he took our most common tactic for dealing with bad situations and spent at least some time whining. We want him to whine a little, but instead he rises to the occasion. In our story, we're told that it's because the Lord was with him. And that might very well be, but maybe there was more to it than that. You see, maybe Joseph naturally understood what others of us figure out only after years of trying it the other way. Maybe he understood that for all of our complaining, we often can't change the situations in which we find ourselves. The circumstances are often beyond our control. Maybe he understood that what we have control over is how we deal with them. And the sooner we can work on the things we can control, the better off we will be. For Joseph, this meant working on the relationships he had with those around him. To be clear, this doesn't mean that there isn't room for complaint. As we know, sometimes it's really cathartic to get frustrations off our chest, whether it's in prayer to God or in conversations with friends. But what Joseph reminds us is that we can't stay there. We can't be there and fully live. In other words, we can't complain our way from lemons to lemonade. At some point, we just have to pick those lemons up and start squeezing. Joseph recognized that if he was going to have any hope for fullness of life, then he needed to work on the relationships he had with those around him. In this case, it was the jailer and the other prisoners. Now, there's a danger here. We don't want to make our relationships a means to an end. We don't want to get into relationships because we need something from those other people. No, we develop relationships because at some point we have to recognize that that's where life is found. Friends, life is found in our relationships. Life is found in our interactions with one another. Wherever two or more are gathered, I am there. There's a reason why God calls us to both love God and our neighbor. It's because it's only when we do that that we can ever have noticed when he went in one morning that they were upset. But he didn't just notice. He noticed and decided to ask them what was the matter. And as simple as it sounds, any of us who have ever longed for someone to notice how we were feeling know that it is not. Friends, Joseph didn't just notice that they were upset and walked away. No. He stopped long enough to find out what was going on. He took time to ask. Friends, whether we admit it out loud or not, there's a part of all of us that longs to be noticed. We long to have someone see us. We want someone to recognize when something is wrong, even if we aren't always willing to name it. And part of the implicit contract we make when we enter into a healthy relationship with one another is that when we notice, we will ask. Any couple can tell you, you might not always get a straight answer, but you should always ask. When Joseph asks, the cupbearer and baker tell him that they both had dreams and that they were upset because there was no one there to interpret them. Now at this point, we wouldn't blame Joseph for being a little wary of talking about dreams. After all, last time he talked with people about dreams, his brothers sold him into slavery. Nevertheless, he invites them to share their dreams with him. He says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. Interestingly, this is the first time that we hear Joseph make a single reference to God in the entire time we have been following him. Sure, we're told that God was with him and that he found favor with Joseph in both the captain's house and in the jail, but there's nothing about Joseph having any clue that God was with him. And all in all, it's kind of a strange reference. Joseph seems to be saying the interpretations are in the purview of God, but that he'd give it a shot. Maybe Joseph recognized this gift with the other prisoners that had come to believe that God had given it to him. In other words, maybe he was simply telling him that he would interpret, but that they should understand that it's only because God has given him this gift. It doesn't say that, but maybe. But whatever it meant, the cupbearer is the first to present his dream to Joseph. He said he dreamed that there was a vine with 3 branches that blossomed before him into grapes, and that he grabbed them and squeezed them into a cup and gave it to the Pharaoh. Reminds us of that old Egyptian proverb, when someone gives you grapes, make grape juice. Joseph made quick work of that dream. He said that the 3 branches were 3 days, and that in 3 days the Pharaoh would restore him to his office as chief cupbearer. Then Joseph tells him that when that happens, he should remember Joseph to Pharaoh because he was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews and put in a dungeon for nothing. He asks to be remembered. Well, after the cupbearer received such a favorable interpretation, the baker decided to share his dream with Joseph. He says he dreams that 3 cake baskets were on his head, and who among us hasn't had that dream? The top basket was filled with food for Pharaoh, and birds were eating out of the basket on his head. We might imagine Joseph taking a moment to process the dream before essentially saying, "Ah, yes, in 3 days the Pharaoh will hang you on a pole for the birds to eat you." You're welcome. Yikes! Clearly Joseph has some room to grow in the sharing bad news department. And though we might imagine that he had a few choice words for Joseph, the author of our text unfortunately doesn't share his reaction. Instead, we're told that in 3 days, the cupbearer was returned to duty and the baker was hanged. The passage ends by telling us that when the chief cupbearer was reinstated, he promptly forgot Joseph. Joseph had asked him to do one thing, and he forgot it. And frankly, we get it. We know what it's like to get past a hard situation and just want to put it behind us, to not think about it anymore. We see this in big and small ways in nearly every aspect of our lives, from our personal relationship mistakes to the failures of global economic policy. The truth is, we live in a society that too quickly forgets the challenges of today when we finally reach tomorrow. Unfortunately, as we also know, our forgetfulness doesn't just affect us. Here, Joseph basically did all the right things. He used his gifts to the best of his ability. He made friends with the jailer. He interpreted dreams in the name of God, but in the end, he was right back where he started, in jail. In fact, we're told that he was there for another 2 years. Joseph did all of the right things, and yet was still in jail for 2 more years. He'd been given lemons. He'd been squeezing as hard as he could, but no matter what he did, he could not make lemonade. The truth is, friends, sometimes this happens. Sometimes life is hard. Some of us get through difficult situations in 3 days, and for some of us it takes 3 years or more. The good news is that God is with us either way. Friends, the good news is that we are not alone in these situations, and that even when we look around and we don't know why, we continue to try to use our gifts. Why we keep squeezing those lemons when we don't see anything coming out. We should recognize that there is at least one who will not forget us when we reach the other side. Friends, the hope of our faith is that life is always possible. And if we were able to remember that, then even when we are in the midst of those troubles, we might recognize that though there might not be lemonade on the other side, there will be something even more delightful.